Yo no veo a nadie.
¿Quién es usted?
Yo estoy aquí en el trabajo.
Hey, Julia, could you go on mute?
Oh, snap. I don't see anybody here. Okay, sorry. Yes. I don't know. Hello, Councilor Edwards. I just have a quick question. There is a screen on my panel that I don't see anybody. So I'm just curious. And
I know how to fix
it's, what do you mean you know how to fix it? They let,
what you're the host.
I don't know. What happened? I was here, now I'm not.
Councilor Mejia, we're waiting a little bit to make sure it's live on YouTube, and then we're gonna start, but everyone's in either the waiting list or is here.
Okay, so I'm in the right place at the right time. This is, okay.
Mhm.
Told you. Thank you.
I'm gonna help you.
I got it. I figured it out. They
Hi, Kathleen. Hi, Shalene.
Hi.
And Shayla, I think we have for the admin.
Hi,
Oh,
everybody.
I'm sorry. Wait, I'm sorry. Where did I say that? Okay, okay. Shayla's here. Shalene's here. Kathleen's here. Okay. I see the counselors and what I was Gabe, Gabriel Camacho.
Gabe's here.
Gabe's here. Wait, I have two Gabes. Gabe Camacho and Gabe Vieira.
Pierre's here.
Okay. Gabe Camacho.
Yes, the Gabriel Camacho, the OG.
Gabriel.
Yes.
UFCW, right?
Yeah, UFCW.
And I see you, Gabe, from Zip Run.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. All right. Just making sure. Okay. Are we good to go? Candace?
Councilor Edwards, we're still waiting on confirmation from IT. However, we are recording and this recording will be posted. So at any point, once they get us live, the live stream will kick in for viewers at home. So if you wanted to start, you're free to, as we are recording.
All right. So if viewers can't quite yet see us.
I haven't received their confirmation yet. I was told that they are switching out the links from the last hearing. We just haven't received the confirmation that we're live at this time.
Okay. Well, let me just make sure I have all the counselors. I have Mejia, Flynn, Flaherty.
I just received confirmation we're live now.
Excellent. Counselor Janey, I see you. We're going to let you in shortly. And we'll get started once Counselor Janey's in. Okay. All right. So I'll go ahead and start the video. Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lydia Edwards. I'm the chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It's Thursday, August 20th, and we're here today for a virtual hearing on docket 0895, Ordinance amending CBC Chapter 8-13, Equitable Regulation of the Cannabis Industry in the City of Boston. This matter was sponsored by myself and Councillor Janey and was referred to this committee on July 29th. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order modifying certain requirements of open meeting law, we are able to have this hearing virtually via Zoom. This enables us as a city council to do our work while also ensuring public safety and access. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-TV. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964. For public testimony, written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made a part of the record and available to all councilors. The City Council passed this ordinance establishing equitable regulation of the cannabis industry on November 20th, and it was signed into law by Mayor Walsh on December 2nd. The ordinance established a Boston Equity Program, created a board, and also created, a Boston Cannabis Board, and established criteria for licenses to ensure quality and fairness, and established a mechanism for funding and recognized community impact and involvement. However, members of the public, marijuana entrepreneurs, and city councilors have expressed concerns about the lack of transparency in the municipal approval process of the marijuana businesses. The intent of this proposal is to increase transparency of the licensing process to provide distinction among different types of marijuana businesses. In short, to summarize the amendments and the conversation that we're going to have today, it is around first, looking at the HCA process. As interpreted, the regulations right now have the board doing the licensing and granting a license, but ultimately the city or the Office of Economic Development will be making the final decision as to who gets a host community agreement. This is after the license. I'm critical of that process because there is no timeline, no standards, and no public process for that HCA. I have proposed, and I think that we should either have the HCA be approved by the board, which this amendment could allow for, or at the very minimum, allow for, after the board has granted a license, the HCA have a finite amount of time, the Office of Emerging Industries or Economic Development have a finite amount of time that is clear to everyone to grant and give the HCA. I think predictability is what all of the entrepreneurs and folks in this industry have been begging for. And by allowing us to leave that open, I guess, that loophole, again, for allowing for the city to, again, have it sit on someone's desk, wait, we don't know for how long, it's not clear in the regs, is unfortunate and unnecessary. The other aspect that I am critical of and am providing a amendment for is the one-for-one analysis. Now, I think that's wonderful and great how the board has interpreted that and committed to having a one-for-one. However, I don't believe it should cross apart different facets of the industry. It should keep dispensaries on a one-for-one analysis and delivery businesses on a one-for-one analysis to allow us to have a dispensary matched with a delivery business on the one-for-one as non-equity and equity sets us up, I think, for too many of the businesses, the dispensaries to be owned by corporate, rich, well-funded, and far too many times older white men, while the delivery businesses, which are easier to access, easier to fund, and easier to start, being overwhelmingly by people of color. And what that means is, and treating them like it's a one-for-one, like we're doing equity, I think is incorrect. And I'd like to correct that interpretation. And finally, there is an issue already, again, in East Boston around deliveries. And I think we can get ahead of that as a city. I firmly am excited about delivery businesses. I want them to thrive. I believe they are incubators for future dispensary owners and access to wealth. So this is a good thing. And I'm happy that the city is pushing to get them done. However, we don't have regulations to analyze how they should be done. And what I propose, I do not want to overregulate them because they don't have product, but I do propose that we do the following. One, that city, because they can deliver all over the city, I wonder if it makes sense that the district city councilor, where they're going to start delivery, has any say or much say at all. I think they should be downtown, and that licenses or delivery processes should happen almost in a neutral setting downtown where they're evaluated. And number two, I also think that the individual dispensaries who may want a delivery business should go through the community process. Because as far as I'm concerned, with the example of East Boston, Berkshire Roots is changing their HCA, excuse me. As a result, it's a modification that should go through the community process because it's their modification that is impacting the community. And what we saw recently is that the delivery person had to go up there and defend themselves, and it made no sense. It should be Berkshire Roots and any other dispensary to demonstrate that they have the infrastructure, that they are located in a place that makes sense, to allow for them to make additional money off of an additional aspect of their business. That should also make sense, also considering we're going to have to be delivering or be deciding about on-site consumption. It should be on the dispensary and the locations burden, not the delivery. So my actual suggestion is to make it faster for delivery folks to get through. And then when it comes to the neighborhoods where the dispensaries are located, that the community be part of that process. I wanted to be clear about the outline of this conversation from the outset for my colleagues and for those who are here today, because what we're not going to discuss is whether cannabis should be legal or not. That is not up for debate. What we're not going to be discussing is whether delivery should happen or not. That is not up for debate. What we are going to be discussing is how Boston can continue to be an equitable industry and a leader in the country. And I'm excited about that conversation. So for those who want to still debate the issue of legalization of marijuana, I will redirect the conversation to allow for a more productive vein of conversation. With that being said, I'm joined here today by the co-sponsor, Councillor Janey. She has some technical issues, so she might be on and off. After Councillor Janey, I'm joined by Councillor Flynn, Councillor Braden, Councillor Flaherty, Councillor Mejia. I am not sure if other councillors have also joined us today. Yep, I got Councillor Braden. So with that, I also wanted to note we are joined by Kathleen Joyce from the Licensing Board, Shayla from the, Shayla, I'm so sorry, I don't have your last name on the screen, from the Office of Economic Development, and Shalene Title from the CCC, Cannabis Control Commission. So what I'd like to do is have my colleagues do some very brief opening remarks, and then we're going to allow for the panelists to respond to and discuss and questions about the amendments, proposed language, and even this process. And then we'll get to the public as well. So as I stated, very brief, Councillor Janey.
Yes,
Yep,
I'm
great.
here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm going to leave the video off for just the purpose of what's going on. I'm also now changing devices because I've been having some issues. Thank you. And I will be very brief because I want to get right into the conversation. People know the reason the council moved forward with the ordinance and passed that is because we care deeply about equity in the city and making sure that we're repairing the harms from the war on drugs. The spirit of the ordinance is around equitable regulation of the cannabis industry. Critically important as it is emerging here in our city that we get it right. The intent, again, from the regs of the board must follow the intent of the ordinance. We have to be careful, particularly around delivery, to make sure we're not setting up a multi-tiered system where we are directing all equity applicants and people who are disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs to delivery and leaving the dispensaries to large companies. That is not what we are here to do. So we need to see equity throughout. I'm gonna leave my remarks brief. So if colleagues have other remarks, because I want to get into the conversation. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for your partnership.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Thank you, Councilor Janey, and thank you, Kathleen Joyce, for your leadership on this issue. I have no opening statement. Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. Counselor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no opening statements. I just want to thank you for holding this hearing. We are facing a lot of applications for a host agreement, and I just would like to see the process move forward. So anything we can do to expedite it and ensure equity in the process, I really welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, thank the co-host and also thank Commissioner Joyce for joining. Just a quick question that probably can be addressed in the hearing, which is sometimes we as counselors, as policymakers, when we're as well intentions as everything is, sometimes we either miss something or we may put a two.
I think we've lost them.
I heard policymakers, that's all I heard.
Oh, I heard that sometimes we, and
Yeah, do you have me back, Madam Chair?
yes.
So I'm saying basically as city councilors, as policymakers, sometimes we have the best intentions and it could be a 2 or a 4 or a but, and then it sets off a whole bunch of unintended consequences. So that would be my concern is as we're having this discussion, and maybe this is more directed to the commissioner in her presentation, is that are there any unintended consequences from sort of this change in the ordinance? That's all. So I know what the spirit and the intent, and have been in full support. I just want to make sure when we're tweaking things, sometimes again as lawyers and as policymakers, we're on sort of the same page and the same ground, but there's a difference between sort of theory and practice. And then when the ordinance is actually implemented, there are unintended consequences. I just want to make sure that we don't now all of a sudden have a whole bunch of unintended consequence cases. I totally agree with the chair and the co-sponsor. Predictability is probably the most important thing. It's predictability in just about everything we do here as a city is important, whether it's through investment, through business, education. Everyone wants to have some level and some degree of predictability. And there is some uncertainty with respect to how things have been, rolling out and who and what, where and when. Totally get that. I just want to make sure what we have in front of us, the document we have in front of us, the discussion we're having today, I just want to make sure that we don't have any unintended consequences, because there's so many people right now in the pipeline, and they've been in the pipeline for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. We've also been joined by Councillor Bach and Councillor Arroyo. Councillor Mejia.
Thank you. I'm going to be brief, Councillor Edwards. So just really quick, I think, so thank you to the chair, thank you to the sponsors. We're really excited to have this conversation today. As the chair of small business and workforce development, we've seen the impact that entrepreneurship in the cannabis industry has had on our community. One thing that I want to uplift is in this meeting is the opportunities for low-income people and people of color to be able to open up shops across the entire city. I've heard from too many people about all the roadblocks and red tape and bureaucracy that exists to opening up shops. And if we're really serious about this word equity that I keep hearing be thrown around in all these different spaces, then I think this is an opportunity for us to really be real about what's it going to take for us to remove those barriers. Today, during the conversation that we had around quarry reform, hosted by Clarity and Flynn, I asked the question about the role that the cannabis industry, the emerging market, plays in helping to support people in that industry. And I feel like there's just barriers. The last thing that I'll say is too often
Can we put our phones on mute, or while other folks are speaking, we're hearing the echo. Go ahead, Councilor Mejia.
One thing that we want to so too often the areas of the city that are the easiest to start up a business are the ones that are least accessible to communities of color. We need to work to ensure that we're not just putting rules in place, but that we're designing this system from the ground up with a community-centered approach. I really look forward to this discussion and getting to the answers. And I also want to just kind of add that the one thing that we may not be able to get to here, but I think that we should talk about are these buffer zones around the schools. I think that that's something worth looking into in terms of removing barriers to where people can open up shop. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That is also in the state regulation, so we will not be able to do that with the zoning amendment. But I do appreciate that. That has brought up before, Councillor Mejia. Councillor Bach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we're pressed for time and I want to get into the substance here. So I'll just say I'm glad to be here and continuing the work to make sure that the intention of the council around equity in this industry is really reflected in the implementation of the ordinance. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Councilor Arroyo.
I'll keep it short because I want to get right to it. I know we're behind, so let's just get to work. You know, I care about equity deeply, just like everybody else, and so I'm interested in making sure that this reflects that. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and just have each of the panelists say a little bit about the amendments and suggestions of their thoughts. And I'll start with Kathleen. We'll go to Shayla. We'll go to Shalene Title, and then we'll go to Gabrielle Camacho from UFC 1445, just to get kind of their thoughts initially. I think also Gabrielle Vieira from Zip Run, who is a would-be delivery licensee, can also speak. And then we'll be able to, I think, go through the questions much more efficiently so we can hear where the city is. You've looked at the amendments, what your thoughts are. I'd appreciate that. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen Joyce.
Thank you. I don't have any specific prepared remarks. I just want to address some of the questions that you've already raised and to say the board is really willing to work with you on this. You guys are the policymakers. We're here to implement and enforce your policy. I want to talk about a couple of things you brought up and some of the unintended consequences that Councilor Flaherty addressed earlier. Let me start by saying that HCAs are no longer signed by the Office of Emerging Industries. HCAs are signed by Corporation Counsel. I don't know if anyone had an opportunity to tune into our first hearing yesterday where we approved 2 equity applicants. I said on the record that their HCAs will be a draft of them by Monday or early next week to the district city councilor. And I want to address the fact that negotiations don't start until after the hearing. I disagree wholeheartedly. I see the negotiations starting at the community meeting level. That's when the community has an opportunity to talk about what is important to them, what quality of life issues are affected by this business opening up in their neighborhood. Just like in liquor licensing, those issues are brought before the board and we talk about them. That's what happened yesterday as well. We talk about the community meeting, we talk about the abutters and their interests, and we go through those. And the Corporation Council's job is, as it relates to the host community agreements moving forward, is to memorialize those issues and those conditions. Those conditions that are approved by the board make their way into the host community agreement and onto the face of the cannabis license. We take those things seriously. So as of yesterday, when we approved 2 applications, they are now being memorialized, those conditions, into the HCA, and there'll be a draft into the district city councilor by early next week. We have already contacted the ZBA. Those appeals can begin. And we've already contacted the applicants to let them know that they can move forward with their process at the state level. Talking about some unintended consequences, I am concerned about some of them, about having one-to-one by license type. I think the state has given us an opportunity to fast track these delivery licenses. And I think it's important to get those going. There's only 1 delivery service that's been approved in the entire state. And back to how it affects the community, those are questions that are now being asked at the community meeting. Does this applicant plan on having delivery? That is what a normal process would be. Is this something that the applicant plans on looking for towards the future? Those questions were asked yesterday as well in our hearing. One of the unintended consequences could be something like the independent testing and laboratory facilities. If we have to have a 1-to-1 ratio in order to get those on our agenda. Right now, we have 1 application pending for an independent testing and laboratory facility. At our rules and regulations hearing, that applicant talked about how they're ready to go and how the state talked about how we need these facilities in the state. If we have to have a 1-to-1 ratio for this particular type of license type, we could be waiting a long time for this person to get going. I understand the reason, I understand that it might be possible to carve out delivery, and I'm open to that. I think it might make sense. And I do think that the neighborhood in which the deliveries will be made should be is the most impacted, and we should be listening to those people. As far as the right to appeal a license that has not been granted, that appeal is an administrative appeal to Superior Court under Chapter 38. It's not an appeal to our board. I'd like to introduce Shayla White. and explain her role now. Chayla works in the Office of Economic Development. She's an attorney, and she now certifies our equity applications for the city. She is someone who testifies before the board about the process that she went through to certify someone as an applicant, an equity applicant. And I'm happy to answer any specific questions. I don't have any broad statements about our process. I can tell you that we are working really hard to be transparent. We are not cherry picking our agenda. We're going by dates of application and filing their plans with ISD. We are being fair, we are open, and we are willing to work with you on this to make this process better. We've had one hearing, and that hearing was yesterday, and we approved 2 applications. And those HCAs will be signed, or draft of them will be in the district city councilor's inbox by early next week. So I don't know what else to say as far as what we could do better. We're working together, we're working every day on this, and we're trying to make the process open and accessible to everyone.
Shayla?
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't have any prepared remarks. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have about the certification process. But what I will say is that in your amendment to the ordinance, I was happy to see that City Council codified the fact that each member counting towards the 51% ownership threshold is required to meet at least 3 of the criteria. That I was very happy to see.
Thank you. We're going to now turn it over to Shailene. Title?
Thank you, Chair Edwards, members of the committee. I really appreciate the opportunity to submit comments today. And I just deeply appreciate watching this, the clear commitment of this committee, the City Council, the Boston Cannabis Board, the Office of Emerging Industries, to not just have a good policy on paper, but that you are truly committed to following how this is playing out in practice and making the necessary tweaks. I really can't overemphasize how much I appreciate that. I'm here generally in support of the changes. I have 3 particular areas I want to mention that I'll go through briefly. First, I mentioned in previous testimony that refining the ratio would be more impactful. And I think doing that by license type is a very simple, straightforward way to do that. So I want to support that. And Chairwoman Joyce just mentioned the possibility of exceptions for independent testing labs. I think that makes sense, and I would support that as well. In terms of host community agreements, I just want to support adding as much predictability and transparency to that process as possible, particularly as it relates to a set timeline that applicants can depend on. And as I'm sure you all hear as much as me, that part of the process tends to be the sticking point for applicants across the state. And it is much more difficult for smaller applicants to absorb the costs of uncertainty around a timeline. And so the more specifics, the better. And for those reasons, I support the changes providing a more specific timeline for the drafting and execution of the host community agreement. I'll say also that I watched the Boston Cannabis Board hearing this weekend. Just as a citizen, that is what I would expect and want to see when a city negotiates a host community agreement, the transparency, the way they talked about the scorecards, the thoughtfulness that they put towards it. And then finally, I have some comments on delivery. First, the commission, the Cannabis Control Commission, is considering public comment currently regarding changes to delivery licenses. So as soon as those changes are made, if they're made, we will make that clear to the public. And we welcome your feedback, any of you that you might have on those changes. But as of now, I wanted to make it clear that I would describe the licenses as a courier business that obtains products from a retailer and delivers it to a consumer, similar to something like a Grubhub or a Uber Eats. And so given that delivery licenses are reserved for social equity and economic empowerment businesses, I think it's important for all of us as we regulate those businesses to consider as context how similar businesses in other industries are regulated. I also wanted to note one small tweak I might recommend is looking at the changes and the contemplation of a partner dispensary for a delivery business. A delivery business might have just one partner dispensary, but they may have many. So I would reconsider tying any requirements to one partner dispensary. Although after hearing Councilor Edwards, your rationale for that, I'd support that you're trying to reduce the burdens on delivery businesses, and that certainly makes sense. Lastly, I wanted to highlight for your consideration that the commission is pre-certifying delivery applicants, and our goal there is to make sure that delivery applicants, and hopefully we can expand this to all social equity and economic empowerment businesses, see the commission first and get pre-certified as a business that has the propensity to run a compliant business. So I would just encourage you to keep in mind over time any advantages that you may want to give to those businesses in terms of skipping over part of the process or any other kind of advantage. And then lastly, I just want to commend you for the way that you're thinking about delivery businesses in particular, and possibly making a exception or parallel process for them, considering that as they are currently modeled, they won't have marijuana at their headquarters. And so things like buffer zones or other rules that might have been made, we're probably not contemplating that type of business. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you very much. And Gabriel Camacho?
Yes, good afternoon. Counselors, Commissioner, by way of introduction, my name is Gabriel Camacho. I'm the Political and Organizing Director for UFCW 1445. I want to say that our union has a strong commitment to diversity, inclusion, and equity. Indeed, the new leadership of the local, President Fernando Lemus, Secretary Treasurer Fabricio da Silva, people of color, immigrants, as well as myself, Latinx. It's not only a political decision to be involved in issues of racial justice for our local, but it's also a personal commitment from ourselves as leaders of this union. Having said that, we agree with two of the proposed changes, and that is the 1-to-1 ratio on deliveries and bifurcating that from the dispensaries, as well as having the HCAs negotiate with the parent organizations as opposed to the subcontractors. Having said that, I also want to make a general comment, and that is, in order to foster and strengthen your goals for equity, inclusion, and diversity, it is very important that licenses be tied to strong employment plans, workforce development. And one way, historically, as we know, for marginalized and excluded communities to gain access to the quote middle class in the United States is by unions. So we think that a criteria looking forward as this new industry and new regulations get developed is that these licenses get tied to a commitment to protecting labor rights, including the right to organize, including the right to collective bargaining agreement. And one of the watermarks for that is a labor peace agreement, in which the company applying for a license agrees not to employ anti-union tactics, and the union has access to the workers at the facility. So that ends my remarks, and thank you very much. And I would say for the commissioner, the Boston Cannabis Board has been extremely transparent. Yes.
Thank you.
And then there was also Gabe Vieira from Zip Run, who, if I understand correctly, and you can might be the first delivery business in the Commonwealth. So that's we're dealing with the regulations and this conversation really honestly because of you, Gabe, and also because of the location in East Boston. So I did want to give you the floor because whatever we're talking about and the decisions we make today will directly impact you and many others. So give the floor to you for some brief remarks and some thoughts.
Of course. Thank you. I'm definitely humbled for the opportunity to speak today. To give you guys some background on myself, I grew up in Boston. I went to UMass Amherst, graduated from the Eisenberg School of Business about a year ago, or I said a year and a half ago from now. The goal was to build a delivery company that could be sufficient enough to actually be able to deliver the demand that a lot of dispensaries have. And I think the ultimate goal, I would say the ultimate problem we've been having throughout this process is that we did have the opportunity to receive the pre-certification application, but going from the pre-certification application to the provisional license has honestly been quite a challenge. I'm not going to put blame on the city of Boston because it's something new to the city, it's something new to everybody else, but that process has been such where we've kind of been stalled. So I've put some of my own money in to ZipRun over the past year and a half. And currently doing that while waiting to receive our provisional and final license has kind of put me in like a financial bind. So my only hope or goal would to be hopefully come out of this with a smoother process. To Councilor Edwards' point, where we would directly deal with the city of Boston. I think that makes more sense than rather dealing with an East Boston community, because at the end of the day, that is the East Boston community is supposed to deal with the Berkshire Roots Corporation, whereas ZipRun is here to deal with the city of Boston to make sure their regulations and make sure we follow by their regulations, rather than we're making sure that we appeal to each, I guess, town within the city of Boston. So to her point, I definitely agree with that. And lastly, like I said before, I'm definitely very humbled to be a part of this experience, and I definitely want to work with everyone to figure out the best solution. So thank you again, Councilor Edwards, for inviting me to this, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and start questions and suggestions. I'm going to kick it off with, so one, thank you, Kathleen, so much for that clarity. I'm actually very encouraged by the thought that the HCAs are moving that fast. What I hope you saw in the amendment, and I hope people see in the amendment, was not, well, what I was trying to do with the amendment was make very clear how that process will go going forward. So you've done it. You've told me that you had the hearing, you approved an HCA, and 5 days later, by next Monday, right, there should be a draft from Corporation Counsel.
Yeah, let me just be clear, like the HCAs are 90% boilerplate, and the other 10% are the conditions that are brought before us started at the community level. We have no interest in like then going back to the community. We want this to be a collaborative process. It's how
I think I want to be, yes, what I want, and I'm not denying any of those things. And I'm so encouraged, you know, I saw the parts of the hearing too, the thoughtfulness, the back and forth from the board. This is not a criticism at all of the board's work. Okay,
no,
not at all. But I want in the regs to know, after the board has made a license, what is the confirmed timeline for the HCA? That's all.
It's a matter of days. It could be within 24 hours. We have one.
I think that we should have that. Right, but the point is to have that predictability for a person if they're going through this process. I wouldn't put 24 hours. I would. Very well, but I hope we're agreeing on the same thing. We want it as soon as reasonably possible.
I mean, we could actually have an agenda with 20 applicants someday, and it might be a big lift to ask one person to have those in 24 hours. We're working on this even before we get to the voting hearing.
You're right. I guess I think we're agreeing. All I'm asking for is what you think is if a week after the fact makes sense of their approval, or 10 business days, just having the predictability.
As you know, this is a new board. We're trying to work out some kinks, and I know, and I can give you my word that we are working diligently on this. Alexis Kachuk is no longer signing these HCAs. We've transitioned her roles to Chayla, to the board, and to Corporation Counsel. So moving forward, I just need some time to think about, what is practical. We went through our first hearing yesterday, And now we're talking about how we can do it better when we haven't even done it once. So it's hard to kind of figure out what that timeline would be. I'd be guessing, and then I might be back here and tell you, geez, I can't promise that this one person or this office we might have 20 applications in one day. But I agree with you. We want the applicants to have predictability.
Wonderful. So I think then it's a matter of in a working session or what that looks like. And we can schedule the working session at a time where you might have had more than one hearing, right? And you can see how these HCAs, and we can learn from that. But what I'm hearing is that we agree that there should be some predictability in the HCA process. And yes, I'm again thanking you and thanking this process for the grassroots coming up and forming those final conditions. And also, I'm grateful actually that you're turning over the draft to the district city councilor. I didn't know that was coming. So thank you for that as well. So on the second aspect of my suggestions on the 1-for-1, I really like your idea about the carve out for the delivery for the 1-for-1. I think that makes sense. It's again, for some of all the entities, they're the one that don't produce and handle and maintain product. They just move from one section to the other. So I think a carve out would help us to assure that they don't end up buffering or helping, dispensaries get more, At the same time, I completely agree with your argument about the testing lab facility.
Yeah, I think that could be something to think about as well, to carve out. Because you might have somebody who's ready to go that has to wait years until an equity applicant is able to open up an independent testing facility.
When the reality is, how many do we really need, honestly, of independent testing facilities? They're all looking at the same thing, and I agree with you. I think they need to be, there's two areas where we need to be moving as fast as possible. So I look forward to that. In terms of the regulations for the delivery. So I had some suggestions at the beginning, and I'm wondering if you're open to some suggestions. Again, I actually don't want the burden to be on the delivery company, because what I'm seeing, and this is from my lived experience now, having gone through this for the first time. So this is why also I'm proposing this, is because I just went through it in East Boston. A lot of the concerns and honestly disdain that the delivery person received was due to the dispensary's actions and promises made when he wasn't in the room. They promised that the back of their building would not be used to my constituents. They made other promises about traffic. They made all these different things, and then had the nerve to say, well, it's not us doing it, it's the delivery service. And so they put him in that horrible position. I'm saying that very openly. And so I personally think, because delivery people, once they get their HCA, they can deliver anywhere. So having them be linked to a specific location, what East Boston needs and so on and so forth, might be different than Mattapan, where his business is located. So I'm suggesting a central processing and movement just almost directly to the board, and letting the board just take care of the delivery services. And then as now you're saying, these local entities, these local dispensaries are now being asked from the very beginning, are you going to have delivery services and so on and so forth? Or even with those who have an HCA already, if they're going to petition for delivery service or would like that added, I would like the dispensary to go back to the community and not hurt the delivery person. Let him go on with his business and let him go on and do whatever.
I agree. I see it as a change in the license, just like you would in liquor. If someone wants to sell nips and singles, it has to be discussed at the community level. If someone wants to do delivery, it has to be discussed at the community level. And that's my opinion.
No, I 100%. I think that would also help the delivery person not borrow stresses, promises, and things like that they had nothing to do with. And I also think it's a matter of efficiency. I do believe, because the state has emphasized them being equity applicants, I want to move them along. I do believe there's a pipeline to one day opening a dispensary and having access to an industry and economic growth. And I really don't want to be in the way of that because of a dispensary's issues at the local level.
We would need to work with ISD on changing the carve outs, because right now, the way it is in the zoning code, I don't think we can just carve it out as part of our rules and regulations.
Understood. So we would, so right now, if the delivery, because they're treated like every other cannabis entity, they have to do the whole community thing and back and forth. I do think I'm happy to work with you to figure that out, unless any of my colleagues have particular concerns. But I think because they can go anywhere, literally outside of Boston once they get that HCA. How East Boston needs to negotiate with them is I wouldn't say. I would rather do it with the dispensary. That's all. That's all I'm saying.
I think that makes sense.
Wonderful. So I think honestly, a lot of this is, I'm very encouraged by this conversation. But the HCAs, I think we'll be able to get there on a timeline that and feel is reasonable. With the 1-for-1, I think we'll think of some carve outs for the deliveries. And then on the deliveries, we'll set up some regulations that allow really for the board to just get right to it and ask those questions specifically, especially if they're pre-certified by the state. I wanted to remind people they're already getting certified and vetted at the state level, so it makes sense maybe to move them along at the city level. And then just curious about your thoughts on labor conditions or standards being added to maybe the point system that we have right now. Do we do that with liquor licenses?
No, we don't.
Oh, yeah, okay. So it wouldn't be on parity, at least with them, but would that be something that we could at least consider legally to have, how they treat their workers?
It could be one of the things we think about. There's a lot of things we think about when we go through our evaluation of the applicants.
But we certainly couldn't require a union on site for a license.
I don't believe so. I don't think we can get into that private, contract.
All right. Those are my questions. Thank you so much. I look forward to, go ahead.
I just wanted to get your feedback on the administrative appeal. If it's denied, it's not something, it would have to be administratively appealed to Superior Court, which I don't think is the intent of what you wanted. You wanted them to be able to come back to the board. Yeah, so we would have to talk about that. You can't just, if it's denied and they want to appeal something that an administrative board denies, it has to be appealed to Superior Court.
That's just part of the statute. What is it, 30A or 30B or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right then. So there's, I guess I wanted to make sure after a person came so far, if they're denied, I see you guys, Mr. Camacho, I see you. 1 second, let me just finish. If a person is denied, is there a deferral process or some way in which they could course correct it all at that point? Or is it just over?
Well, yesterday we had to defer one. So we deferred it.
Okay.
And then we asked them for more information. We could also deny it without prejudice. They could come back. If something's denied, it has to be appealed to Superior Court. So we do. We have different levels of decision making.
And second chances. Okay. So just for folks' education, I tend to go through my colleagues' questions before we get to back and forth amongst the panelists. So Mr. Camacho, do you have a clarifying point, or did you want to just go back and forth on a specific issue?
No, just a clarifying point, and I apologize if I did not make myself clear. That is, our intention is not to have the board or the commission adopt unionization as a criteria for licensure. However, we think that labor rights and labor protections should score high when you consider applicants. And that means whether you're in a labor dispute, that should not count. That should be negative points. Whether you have a collective bargaining agreement with any union, that should count for good points. And whether you have a labor peace agreement, as I said, that's our hallmark. But we're not asking you to include that at this moment. But we think that labor protections on labor rights, for especially in this industry, a growing industry, is a must. It's in its infancy here in the Commonwealth.
Thank you. And I wanted to note one of the board members is actually Darlene Lombos, who is head of the Greater Boston Labor Council. So I do believe there is a labor perspective and questions. And also to my question to the chairwoman Joyce, I believe these hearings are open so that anybody can come in with that perspective and question and write letters acknowledging or being concerned about.
Darlene did ask those questions.
Oh, wonderful.
We use your criteria to look at these applications. We have to go by the criteria that's in the ordinance. And this is not in the ordinance, so that might be a discussion you want to have. But we do have Darlene, that's her voice. She is, she asks those questions and that's her role.
Excellent. So I'm gonna turn it over now to my colleagues in order of their arrival. So Councillor Janey, who's the co-sponsor.
So much, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So many thanks to the administration. Thank you, Chairwoman Joyce. Certainly want to thank Commissioner Title and the many entrepreneurs and advocates who have been working in this space. Just wanted to kind of follow up on some of the questioning on delivery. You know, when I think about delivery, and certainly I think what the goal and intent is to make sure that there's equity throughout. Certainly that is one of the business opportunities that it has a lower, I guess, in terms of barrier to entry. Folks can get into that more easily because the costs are lower, et cetera. And that's fine. So I certainly don't mind a carve out or that there is some special preference for equity applicants there. What I think I want to guard against and make sure that we are being mindful and intentional is that we don't end up, 10 years from now in a city where all of the delivery are kind of people of color and then all of the dispensaries are owned by people who are not from Boston, people who are larger corporations or people who are not disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. So it's about finding that right balance. I do think about delivery more in terms of the Grubhub, Uber Eats, Lyft style, that someone would go to a dispensary, I guess, on their website, they would have the option to pick delivery, and then that company is somehow partnered with this dispensary and potentially other dispensaries. I'd be interested in what, people think about these different models as they've worked elsewhere and what we might learn from other cities. And in terms of the HCA, so good to hear that there's a real focus on equity there. So I like that, and that the board is owning that is no longer, I mean, I know, Shayla, you have a role in that in terms of determining equity applicants. So I think that is very, very important. I'm really interested to hear what happened earlier this week in terms of process, as well as thoughts, and I know it's not in the amendment, but one thing that can come up as we're trying to make something more predictable, and I would certainly echo the sentiments around whatever that timeline is. I know it might be too early to put in writing what we think it may be, but I think if it's a week, 10 days, that we should have something that is in writing so that it's predictable and that it's transparent. To that goal, I think part of what we end up with when there are multiple dispensaries competing in the same area is just kind of a rush to the finish line. And I know even as we were discussing the ordinance itself and as we're using this process to figure out how we can improve, I wonder what thoughts anyone on the panel has in terms of grouping approvals. So for example, I don't know if it's quarterly, monthly, whatever it is, but if there were a number of dispensaries or businesses trying to open in a specific geographic area where they would be tripping over themselves in terms of the buffer zone, is it easier or more difficult for the board to consider them at once or continue with this rolling application process?
I think it's more difficult. I think, who's to say that after we group them together, 6 months later, somebody else wants to be in that area. I'm trying not to show favorites or cherry pick. I'm going by application dates. I'm going by community meeting dates. I'm going by when they invested in their architecture drawings and filed them with ISD. I think that's the fairest way to do it. It's hard to tell 2 years from now if somebody else wants to come to that particular neighborhood. Like, we would be locking down an entire area. And I made
just to clarify, Chairwoman Joyce, so I appreciate your response that there would be applicants well after that grouping. And I'm not suggesting that those applicants then would be locked out, but if, let's say the remainder of 2020, so we've got a couple of months left, are we looking at all of those applicants, and applicants will be approved on a date in December or November or what have you? I don't know. And it's just something that I know keeps coming up as I talk with various applicants or people who are interested, certainly in my district, when they're coming up against buffer zones. It seems to be just a race to who can get there first, and not necessarily a consideration from the community of who would be the best applicant for this area. So that's why I posed the question. I don't know, maybe we can't get around that. And anyone on the panel, feel free to also offer your response. Is that helpful in terms of the clarification though, Chairwoman Joyce?
Yes, and I'll just give you my perspective. We can't compare applicants to each other. We can't, we have to evaluate every application on its individual merits. It feels like we're changing the rules in the process. Someone could have been waiting 2 years to get to this point, and somebody else just started it. That's my opinion. I'm trying to look at this through the licensing lens and a fairness lens. We are going through dates that people applied, dates people had their meetings. I don't compare, in the liquor world, we don't compare, one applicant for a liquor store to another one. We compare it at that time and on their merits.
Well, that's helpful. I think from the resident perspective, when it comes to community folks at the meetings, what they're doing is they're trying to look at, particularly when they know that there's more than one. So from that perspective, I think they are trying to judge which will be best. But I hear what you're saying from a process perspective that is going to be fair, predictable, and equitable.
And we're all very aware of the buffer zone.
Yeah.
And I brought that up yesterday when we had the Patriot Care applicant before us. He is in a downtown neighborhood. We don't want to see that neighborhood locked down so that an equity applicant can have access to it. I asked the applicant on the record if they would be supportive of a buffer zone variance if in the future an equity applicant came and wanted to open up within the half-mile zone. We're asking these questions every step of the way. We are committed to equity as well.
Right. And I believe that we definitely have to have the conversation on zoning because, what is happening downtown or Seaport or Fenway right now, there are no equity applicants. And that is a problem. And they will be locked out. There's already Patriot Care downtown. I'm not sure who got approved yesterday. I would be interested in what happened yesterday. But the other issue, just on the appeals, I wanted to come to this, and I don't know, I'm hoping that our chairwoman has her timer ready, because I feel like I'm running low on time.
You're over.
Okay, so then I will wrap up here. I appreciate you giving me a little leeway here as a co-sponsor.
Yeah.
Just to kind of follow up on the appeal process, I hear you that if it's denied outright, it goes to Superior Court. That's just how it is. My question, though, is if it's denied without prejudice, they could come back. Is it come back in 3 months, come back after a year? Like, when can they come back? So if it's denied outright, they've got to go to court. If it's deferred or denied without prejudice, they can come back before the board when?
As soon as they're back in the queue.
Okay.
So just to update you, we approved 2 equity applicants yesterday, and we deferred the non-equity applicant because we want more information from them on their diversity plan. So just to bring you up to date on what the board did yesterday. And they are deferred to the September voting meeting.
Okay, I definitely have more questions, Chairwoman Edwards, but in respect and deference to my colleagues, I will wait for second round. Thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman Joyce.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn. And we are going to try and keep it within 5 minutes. Councillor Flynn.
I think Council Flynn jumped off.
All right. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question about how robust, when you have a conversation with an applicant about their diversity plan, I know I've had the opportunity to talk to many of these applicants as a district councillor. What metrics are you using to evaluate their diversity plan?
Every board member can ask whatever questions they want on diversity. It's one factor that we use to score the applications. Again, we just had our first hearing 2 weeks ago. We voted on it yesterday. So I don't have a lot to look back on.
Yeah, I know it's a priority of mine as a city councillor to ensure that the applicants have diversity within at all levels of their organization, but sometimes it's a little opaque.
It's based on your ordinance, and our score sheet is on our website. So every applicant can take a look at that.
I'll check that out.
Scoring them on, yep.
Very good. That's all I had for now. I know we're tight for time.
We send the score sheet to every applicant, so no one's surprised when they get to the hearing.
That's good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In interest of time, I'll just let you keep moving, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, this was very helpful and enlightening and encouraging. Appreciate the Commissioner's responses, obviously, to my question about the unintended consequences. And obviously, it's interesting as a 10-year, as a former Teamster, Local 25, to envision sort of almost a card check neutrality for pot. So I got to noodle that a little bit more, but interesting to see that Labor is obviously looking to be involved and partner with the facility. So that's interesting, and love to probably explore that a little deeper. And then just lastly, in the event, this is probably more the Commissioner, in the event that I would assume that it's bound to happen. I'm not sure what's happening in other jurisdictions, but once the establishments are up and running, what precludes a sale? I envision, folks being up, a year, 2-3 years, and then they're going to roll out of it, make a score. And my concern will be on the back end as to sort of who the new owner is, and, will they be held obviously to the same commitments and promises that, we see this a lot in development, not to sort of compare and contrast, but, you'll have a developer come in and we'll make a whole host of promises to the community, and then we'll get the permits, and then, they roll the permits, they roll the paper, and a new owner comes in and says, oh, I didn't commit to that. I had nothing to do with that. So I just want to make sure that whatever commitments are being made at the neighborhood level, in the event that, again, we're in the first inning of just trying to get places open. Totally understand that. But the reality is that when they are open, people that may be further back in the line but have capital are going to knock on the door of someone that's already open, and they're going to try to either buy it or maybe become an equity partner, or whatever the potential scenario is. I just want to get a sense as to sort of what your thought process is on sort of that type of activity, because it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when and how.
Licenses are non-transferable. So if anyone transfers, it would have to come back to the board. If they tried to transfer it, that might change. Every year they have to renew the license, like a liquor license, and certify how they're adhering to what they've represented to us at the board. The licenses are non-transferable.
And that includes if they're looking to draw equity from somebody, so they're running a little low on cash, and there's a cash partner that wants to come in. Anytime
every single beneficial interest holder needs to be disclosed to us, down to the 0.003%.
Perfect. And then in terms of the community commitments, any commitments that have been made to the community, whether it's through sort of mitigation or just being a good neighbor, how are we tracking to make sure that those are being honored as well? Someone comes out to a community group to get the host community agreement. They basically sell a big story, and then a year later they start to renege on their commitments, and they walk away from things that they committed to the local civic association and to the
board can't get into private. The board can't get into private commitments between an operator, applicant, or in the community. Those are private agreements, and the board has no oversight over them.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mejia.
Can you hear me? Hello? Hi. Sorry. This is running a little bit late, so I had to take my daughter to eat. But I am listening. I do have some questions for Commissioner Joyce, I'm just curious about some of the processes, more in regards to when we talk about outreach, what plans are in place to make sure that we are making the community meetings available in multiple languages? What opportunities are we looking at to offer food and childcare? You know, we're really serious about removing barriers to those who can get licenses. Then I think we have an opportunity to really think outside the box in terms of how we're communicating to folks. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Those community meetings are set up through neighborhood services. So I'm sure they could talk a little bit more about that.
Are they here?
I don't see neighborhood services on the call, but just like with,
but I'm just curious because you are the, I mean, is that, okay, that might be out of your jurisdiction. Okay, fine, that's a fair response. That's cool. How are we defining areas of disproportionate impact? Some of the neighborhoods that are easiest to start a business are the hardest for communities of color to have access to. So how are we, you know, how are we defining areas that are disproportionately impacted?
that's a good question. The State Cannabis Commission defines it.
Okay, so are they someone here? Can someone answer the question?
I can speak to that, Councilor Mejia. We had a study done based on arrests and convictions, and in some places, additional data like unemployment. I would be happy to send you those studies. And I'd also note that we are redoing those studies to make sure that the areas are current. We're in partnership with UMass Amherst right now to redefine the areas.
So, which brings me to my next follow-up question. And I know that Councilor Edwards, I mentioned earlier about the buffer zones, and I do know that a lot of our neighborhoods have a lot of schools. And so it's just, there seems to be somewhat of a mismatch. And I think that there is an opportunity to really push on this conversation to remove that barrier. And then I'm just curious, I've heard from some folks who have gone through the process, or at least tried to go through the process, is that you have to be able to identify a building, be able to purchase a building, and sometimes you get committed to, and I don't know if this is true or not, but that you get committed to purchasing a space without even knowing whether or not you've been approved for it. Is that true? Or is that, have you heard of that? Anyone? As a barrier to engagement?
I haven't, no.
What kinds of support are there for people looking to start a cannabis business? I'm just curious in terms of technical assistance. Is great, but are there like first time, you know, business owners? Are they receiving support to understand management, to understand operations and financing? Is that part of the technical assistance that potential folks are receiving?
I'll turn that over to Chayla. Chayla, do you have any more information on that?
So far, the technical assistance is what is listed in the ordinance. However, Selena Barrios Milner will be handling technical assistance for the Cannabis Equity Program. So unfortunately, I don't believe she's here, but she would be the person to speak to about those kind of questions.
Is there a dashboard that we can look to when an applicant is not approved, and do they get feedback as to why? And what's the turnaround process in terms of when they can reapply? Can you talk to me about that?
When they can reapply?
Yeah, so first, the first part of the question is in terms of when you are denied, is that information public, and do they get feedback as to why they were denied?
So if we deny a license, that's public, because all of our deliberations are public. We're subject to the open meeting law, and we have to write a decision within 30 days. So they can reapply if the decision will explain why we denied them, if that helps you. We can work with them, but if they have to reapply, if it's a brand new application, they have to get back in the queue. And to address, I don't know, Counselor, if this is what you were talking about, barriers to entry, we did soften in our rules, I think previously, I'm not certain. You had to have a lease or something to show that you were going to be there. We softened it to a letter from the landlord.
Okay. That's exactly, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner Joyce, for understanding my English. And yes, that's exactly what I was going for. And you know, something that really struck me was
so we're at time, Councilor Mejia. So this could be your last question.
Yeah. No, it's not a question. Something that struck me that Councilor Janey talked about in terms of the next 2 years is that it would be really a shame if most of the if this ended up where it's like most of the people of color are the delivery people, and then the people who are in the big positions. That would be a really bad look for Boston. And I really hope that we're going to do everything in our power to ensure that that's not the case. That's all.
I think we agree. Yep.
Sorry, is on mute. Okay, and Councilor Arroyo. He may have had to jump. I think he may have. Before I go through a second round with my colleagues, I do know that there's folks, especially from East Boston, who also wanted to speak. To Gabriel Vieira. I had just one clarifying question for you. Gabrielle, are you there from Zip Run?
I am here.
Okay. I just want to be clear. So in the current process, you have an agreement with Berkshire Roots.
Yes.
And so I'm asking publicly because a lot of the issues that you have inherited are with Berkshire Roots. So I'm wondering if you are able to continue in this process, and if you get approved for a delivery license, would you agree to not act on your agreement with Berkshire Roots until the community of East Boston has worked out those issues with Berkshire Roots?
Yes.
Okay, I needed to hear that. That's very important for me. So thank you. So I am, since the community is here, I'm going to go by order of arrival and sign in. So I see there's Nick and Robin.
Yes,
Are you
good evening.
available?
Good evening.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Councilor Edwards and everyone else on the call. Just voicing my opinion for the public in the neighborhood of East Boston. We do agree that in the process of dispensaries specifically getting licensed, there needs to be a conversation regarding the delivery operations that might take place. The reality is that the dispensary that currently exists in East Boston, that conversation was not able to be had when Berkshire Roots went for their licensing and permit. And we as the neighborhood and residents of the surrounding streets feel that we were put at a disadvantage to that. And so I would ask for future residents and future dispensaries that the city and the council ensure that the residents would have the ability to voice their concerns, opinions, or thoughts on delivery in addition to the dispensary operations. I also am concerned about the 2 dispensaries that exist today and providing the delivery operations in that, and ensuring that there are regulations in place to ensure that the dispensaries location and facilities can handle that. You know, is there parking? Is it in a residential or a commercial zone space? And will it directly impact the surrounding streets with the increase in traffic and flow? That is what I have for my comments, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Also have Laura Corrales. Laura Corrales. Laura, can you hear us? And you need to unmute yourself. Maybe that's it. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and go through. We don't have that many more public folks. So I'm going to go ahead and admit Allison, Jelly, sorry, Eric Olson, and Cassie Smith. And you, if you have public remarks or want to say something. And again, Laura, just one more time. Okay. Then I think I just had Allison. If you're prepared to have any comments or questions. Okay. Okay, Eric Olson. Cassie Smith. Any? All right. Then I have the last three. I'm going to name them out. Jawan Powell. Apologies for mispronouncing your name. Lauren Brody and Leslie Delaney Hawkins. All right. Well, again, any of the folks whose names I just mentioned who have some questions, some thoughts, this is kind of your time. I don't know. I hope we don't have any. Hello?
Counselor, apologies. This is Leslie. I'm the executive secretary to the board. I wasn't looking to.
Oh, I'm so sorry. My apologies. My apologies. All right. Okay, very well. So what we'll do is we'll go through for another round with my colleagues for any other clarifying questions or thoughts. I think, honestly, I really do appreciate this. I want to be clear to the board members and to the commissioner, to the chief, Joyce. I understand you're in the middle of trying to build a bike and ride it at the same time and trying to figure out this in the most equitable way possible. I'm sure this is not, and I don't want you to take this as though I'm questioning your character or your dedication or your, or how hard you are working at this. Honestly, we got on here in June, I think it was, and we had our first hearing about the board before it was informed. You guys got together by July, you had the regs, and you've been given, by August, you've given out 2 HCAs, or positioned 2 people already. So I want to acknowledge that good work. And sometimes if I'm putting out amendments or thoughts before I'm actually acknowledging that good work, it could come across as unintentionally hypercritical. So I'm saying thank you for your work. I do take you at your word that you want to work with us to make sure that we're forming and streamlining and moving this as much as possible. So I do appreciate that. And I do think we've actually come to some really good agreements, or at least direction for now. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And I want to just summarize then what I think we're going to be headed towards in terms of conversation or working sessions or whatever. And that is making sure that there's a predictability in terms of when the HCAs will be issued after a license has been issued. I think for everyone, they should know if a license is denied, there will be no HCA. Right? There's no waiting for that next step. Then there's also the 1-for-1, potentially a carve out that we could work on for deliveries. And then finally, looking at the process for deliveries and streamlining that, making it kind of in the center of Boston versus per location of each dispensary or contract that they have. And I think shifting the burden to those dispensaries from day one, which we are now doing, or for the ones that have gone through already, if they want to add it, that they have to be part of doing the community process over again for that particular service. So those are my summaries. Those are my thoughts. I didn't know. And I do actually think we should consider a couple things. One is looking at how we can account for workers' rights or labor rights within the point system that as would need to be done by us. And also what also within the point system, looking at whether they intend to sell or flip their business, though, as you noted, Kathleen, it doesn't matter if they intend to do that. They have to start the whole process over again. So those are my thoughts and so on and so forth. I will now turn it over to my colleagues to go through whatever clarifying questions that they may have for any of the panelists. Councilor Janey.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? You can. Wonderful. Thank you again. And thank you to all my colleagues. Very thoughtful questions. Just a couple of clarifying questions. I wanted to just clarify, and if Commissioner Title is here, when we're talking about, or Chairwoman Joyce, when we're talking about delivery licenses, we are not, that is not part of the 52. The 52, when we talk about 52 in Boston, 20% of package stores, we're talking about dispensaries, yes?
I can take that first. Council President Jane, that's a really important question. I'm glad you asked it because I think that has been misinterpreted a bit. So for our ownership and caps, we have counted delivery licenses toward retail, but there was no intent that that meant that municipalities should count delivery licenses towards their retail cap.
So then is it left to the discretion of the municipality?
Yes.
Okay, and I don't think of these as caps, these are floors, it's minimum, so it's not cap in my mind. This is not a cap of 52, this is the minimum of 52 that Boston must have, yes? Just so we're clarifying again, right? So we're not talking caps, we're talking about minimum floors. And then just to follow up, you were speaking, Chairwoman Joyce, about really trying to clear those who have been waiting, and certainly appreciate, as you know, I mean, we've all said it, and certainly the entrepreneurs have experienced it firsthand, that people have been waiting for quite some time in the queue. Can you talk about, so you've been going back looking at dates, is that literally your process? Whoever was in the queue first gets to move first? How do people get on the board agenda?
Well, the equity applicants have to be certified by CHALA. So that's an entire independent process. And when the certification process is done, I'm assuming, again, this is brand new, she will notify us that she has 2, 3, 4 equity applicants ready to go. Then we would go and look at our list of applications that we have an application for. That would include those that have completed the online application, that have had a community meeting. Yes, we do look at the dates. Somebody who had a community meeting in September 2019 should not go before someone who had a community meeting in February 2018. So yeah, we're taking a look at that. When they filed their drawings with ISD, a lot of people, what we're finding out is a lot of people are sort of just testing the waters and testing the system and filled out applications. But
so I want to just, before you go on, I would like to clarify, what date are you looking at? Are you looking at the ISD date? Because that's the first thing that someone has to do. Or are you looking at the community meeting date?
It's both.
So I'm sure you're going to run into folks who may have had a very early file date with ISD and perhaps a very late community meeting date, and then others who may have had a later file date but a much earlier. So how do you weigh that if it's both?
We really haven't had that problem, Counselor. What we've found is someone might fill out an application and then never file with ISD. So we have to look beyond the application date. Right. And we're checking with ONS. Why was this meeting 2 weeks after this meeting in the same neighborhood? Like, we're asking those questions.
Mm-hmm.
The system is not perfect, but we're taking a look at all of the circumstances. And believe it or not,
I know we're still learning from the system. It's just the board is still very new. It's just had a couple of years. I get it that we're still learning, and I think it's important that we continue to check in so that we can improve as we learn. And make sure, again, that the shared goal of equity and making sure that there's a clear process, that it's transparent, that there's accountability, and that there's equity at the center. So that's the shared goal. I appreciate that. A couple of questions for you, Shayla. So how many equity applicants have come to you Are you reaching out? What is your process? How many have already been approved and are back into the pool in front of the board? Where are we in terms of equity applicants?
Sure. So similar to what the chairwoman just said, the equity applicants, there are some who have completed the community process. There are some who have, in addition to completing the community process.
Could you just tell me how many applicants overall in the total pool are now designated as equity applicants because they've come before you and they've met the necessary criteria? And you know what that just number is, and then what the process is for reaching out. I would assume you're looking back toward the existing pool. Like, is your office reaching out, or is the expectation that the applicant would have to come to you? I'm just trying to understand.
Sure. So there are 2 that have been certified. The process is that I am looking back on the ones who have been in the pipeline. As new applications come in, they are required to check off whether or not they are interested in pursuing the equity program. If they are, they reach out to me or I reach out to them. I'm just now seeing new applications coming in. So when somebody does designate that they are interested in the equity program, I do reach out to them directly.
Okay, thank you so much. And then this is my last one, I believe, Madam Chair, and that is, you know, particularly for the equity applicants, and I would assume any small local applicant that's not, you know, being backed by a big corporation, that fundraising and financing of their business is an ongoing process. And so once an applicant comes before you, has been approved, at what point would they need to come back before the board, or would they have to come back before the board if they got new financing? Now, I understand if the ownership component of the company changed in terms of equity stake in the company, most definitely that needs to be monitored and checked, because if they were once an equity applicant with 51% of their company being owned and meeting the criteria as listed, if that somehow shifts, then there should definitely be a check and balance there. But if the ownership continues to meet the criteria of being an equity applicant, but they are still in the need of continuing to finance their business, are they required to come back before the board? Just if someone could talk about that process, because I assume that most of these small local folks have to continue. And once they get that HCA, that is the magnet for more capital. That is the thing that lets investors know, okay, this person is really on their way. They're not just some pie in the sky dream. They have gone through the steps, and now they have an HCA. So it's an opportune time to get more money for your business. So I just want to see how that relates to the board.
Any change in ownership would have to come back before the board.
Right, but so just to clarify, if it was not a change in ownership in terms of equity stake, but just investors who either want, it's a loan and they're gonna get their money back with interest, or there's some other way of doing the financing that doesn't involve change of ownership, would they be required to come back to the board?
Yes. There would have to be a hearing on that.
Okay, and is there a time, like, so if there is, let's say, you know, Joe Smo owns a dispensary, or not doesn't own a dispensary, owns a business and is trying to open a dispensary. They just got their HCA. Now the investors that they had been courting and talking to are willing to drop another 500,000 into the business, or whatever is needed for the next step. They would then have to come back to the board by when to disclose that information and then have it discussed among the board. Because again, to my point, what I think has been the experience of folks as they're talking to their investors, this is what I'm hearing from entrepreneurs, you know, that HCA is going to be that magical point where they're able to really come back to their investor, to new investors or their old investors to get new money. At what point are they supposed to come back to the board?
So
like in the timeline.
I don't know of anyone who would invest in one of these companies and not expect an ownership interest in return. So that would have to be disclosed and come back before the board.
So I am in full agreement. That's why that language is in the ordinance. We need to understand who owns the companies. And particularly if we're monitoring equity, that is not what I'm talking about. You can get money without ownership stake in a company. So it could be a loan. I've now got $500,000, $500,000 loan. But the point is there's new money. It's not ownership, but it's money. Am I required to come back to the board? I would be, is what I heard you say. And if so, by what time? Is it you must disclose, if you get new money, you must come back?
I'm trying to make comparisons to liquor. You would have to come back before that loan like closed. We'll have to get back to you on that one. I can't think of every possible scenario.
That would be great. Thank
Okay.
you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I believe we have Councillor Mejia, then Councillor Arroyo. You've also been joined by Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Asabi George, did you have any brief opening remarks, or?
I'll just make a couple of quick statements. I am sorry that I'm so late to this hearing. I appreciate all of you that are here, and certainly the leadership of the sponsors who continue to draw attention to this issue and work on it tirelessly. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mejia. Councillor Mejia. Okay, maybe Councillor Mejia had to step away. Councillor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This might have been answered. I had some connection issues and I just got back on. So I saw the opening, I saw most of the questions, but one of the things that I heard was that the one-to-one, the equity, non-equity applications was causing or could cause some delays. Is that an accurate understanding of that interpretation that I heard from the opening?
And I can answer that real quick if my understanding. The one-for-one proposal in this amendment was to separate by license so that dispensaries were compared to dispensaries and deliveries were compared to deliveries. Chairwoman Joyce noted that that would cause unnecessary delays, for example, when it comes to testing and lab facilities, because we would be waiting for an equity applicant in that case. But to acknowledge, but a compromise would be a carve out potentially for delivery applicants to allow them to move along, and that the other entities, and potentially carve out for testing and labs, and then like dispensaries and other entities be still on the one-for-one.
Okay, that answers it. Thank you so much on that. And just, this might have already been asked as well, but do we know how many applicants currently before the board are equity as to non-equity as far as dispensaries goes?
I believe Shayla had answered that before. It was 2 or 3. I'm sorry, Shayla.
Oh, no, it's fine. 2 have been certified so far.
No, I know that 2 have been certified, but I mean, how many actual pending applications do we have if we have that information? I know at yesterday's meeting, you certified 2 equity applications, one of them actually in my district, and so thank you for that. But there's several, I think, that are outstanding, and I just want to know what the numbers are. When we say one-to-one, how many equity applications are still coming through the pipeline to how many non-equity applications for dispensaries specifically?
Sure. So I believe, let me pull this up. I would say there are approximately 16 applications that I have. I have not certified all of them yet, so I cannot speak to the exact number of ones that could be considered equity applicants.
Thank you. That's helpful. I appreciate you kind of looking at it right now. I'm gonna cede the rest of my time. That kind of answers my basic questions. I'm just gonna make sure I keep listening. I know President Janey and yourself have been asking a lot of the questions, Chair, that I've had interest in. So thank you again, and I'll continue to follow along. And if I have any other questions, I'll raise my hand. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Councilor Mejia has joined us. Councilor Mejia, you have 5 minutes. Councilor Mejia?
Madam Chair, she indicated
No,
that she was
sorry, I just
having.
got promoted
Okay.
to panelist. Sorry.
Okay.
Something happened in transition here. Thank you, Councilor Janey, for always taking care of me. So I'm not gonna use up all my 5 minutes. Councilor Edwards, you'll be happy to know that. I'm just still really curious about process. I just kind of wanna just tease out a little bit more Councilor Arroyo's question in regards to how many applicants we have. Is it possible for us to, is there a dashboard where we could get notified of how many applicants are of color? That is there a way for us to keep this information from accountability standpoint up to date? Is there a way for us to figure that out, or is that already done?
Currently, there isn't a dashboard that I'm aware of. That's a discussion that can be had.
I think it would be helpful in terms of accountability and transparency if there was a way for us to be able to keep track. And then I also think in terms of outreach and communication, I think, you know, I always talk about language access and interpretation and translation and all those things, you know. I just want to make sure that we're also being really super mindful of that language access piece in terms of equity. So I just want to just put that there.
Absolutely. That hasn't been an issue that we've faced thus far, but it is definitely something that we have in mind, and we will, you know, reach out to the necessary resources, like the language access department, and if we ever have a situation where we do have a language barrier.
And so, yeah, I'm going to be mindful of the fact that we're good. I thank you for your time and energy, and I yield the rest of my time, Councilor Edwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So at this point, I think we've gone through 2 rounds with my colleagues, and everybody has been admitted from public in here. So if there's any more public questions, this is, you know, kind of a call out. If anyone has any questions or would like to speak at this point, going once. You can raise your blue hand so I can know. Okay. All right. Well, no one's raised their blue hand. So at this point, I want to thank you for being here today. If my colleagues, do my colleagues have any last minute questions? I think, just want to do that last round.
Wanted to say thank you again to the panel. Look forward to continuing the conversation. And thank you, Madam Chair, for your leadership here and your partnership.
Thank you. Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to end today's hearing. I do appreciate the hard work from the board. I look forward to following up with some language for your consideration. And with that, today's hearing on the amendment is now closed.